Hello, my name is Julian Conley. This is a critique and analysis of the fossil horses and general ecology depicted in Carr's Miocene River environment. Horse evolution has been a major part of paleontology and paleontological research since the 19th century. Depictions of horses as evolving in a linear fashion have been common in educational textbooks depicting paleontology as well as evolutionary biology for a very long time. It's especially prevalent in children's literature. I myself remember books from my childhood that depicted horses from Eohippus, Mesohippus, Miohippus, and so on, up to the modern day horse, in a sort of simplified way to understand evolution and convey it to the general public. However, of course, we as paleontologists understand that evolution is a lot more complicated than this. Animals don't evolve in a linear fashion. And of course, horses have branched out and evolved many different forms and varieties over time. However, the concept of the small horse to the large horse, with fewer toes over time evolving into the single hoof of the modern horse, is a popular way of conveying the idea of evolution. It's very similar to the idea of this descent of man, the ape man becoming more upright over time, a linear progression of evolution. So when we think about how horses are depicted in paleo art, a lot of it has to do with this idea of a linear mode of evolution from small horses to large horses, many-toed horses to single-toed monodactyl horses over time. And we see that again and again in the paleo art record with depicting fossil horses. So actually, I have a specific background in relation to this image by Carr. In my undergrad, I worked at a science education facility that taught evolution and paleontology by using fossil casts of a Mesohippus, and then portraying this image as a sort of rendition of a Mesohippus in its natural environment, how it would have looked in life after we and the children in the program had reconstructed it using their fossils that they had found. So this painting is quite dear to me for that reason. It also has a connection to the Gray Fossil Site, in that the mural in the Gray Fossil Site Museum Exhibition Hall has been done by the same artist, Carr, who got her undergraduate degree at the University of North Texas. I'm sorry, I got my undergraduate degree there. She got, I believe, Bachelor's of Fine Arts. She went there at some point. So she has a connection to that facility as well as East Tennessee State University. So this picture is called Miocene River Environment. It depicts a family of what are identified as Mesohippus running across a Miocene river or stream bed, pursued by a group of canids, potentially also ambushed by an animal identified as a Nimravus. And then in the background, we see an animal identified as a Gomphothere. So in this critique, we're going to be looking at multiple aspects of this artwork, including the Mesohippus themselves. Are they anatomically accurate to the animal that they're depicting based on the fossil record of that animal? Second of all, is this animal in a proper environmental context? Is this the flora that we would have seen this animal living in, same type of habitat? How did it survive in its environment? How do its fossils tell us that it survived? And what does that strategy say about the depiction of this environment as its habitat? We're also going to look at the other animals, the Nimravus and Gomphothere, see if those would indeed be an accurate portrayal of the ecological community that an animal like Mesohippus would be existing in during the Miocene. So the first thing to do is look at Mesohippus's skeletal anatomy. So Mesohippus was one of the earliest true equids. Prior animals like Heracitherium and Propaleotherium were paleotheriids, so not true equids, but they would have been perissodactyls as well. Mesohippus was one of the three-toed horses, so large middle toe and two smaller toes to either side. Now, if we look at the Mesohippus is running here, it's difficult to see their feet clearly. I unfortunately could not find a higher resolution image to clearly show the Mesohippus. However, if you look at the Mesohippus, especially the last one on the left with its feet up in the air, we can clearly see that it does in fact have multiple toes, multiple digits. Now, something interesting that I found while looking at the literature surrounding Mesohippus is that Mesohippus did not truly walk on its hooves the way a modern horse does. A modern horse is an unguligrade. It rests all of its weight on its hoof. Later equids after Mesohippus, such as Merychippus and Hypohippus, were also unguligrades, even though they had multiple toes. They would have had 3 toes. They rested all of their weight still on those 3 hooves. Mesohippus was not unguligrade, it was sub-unguligrade, meaning its feet were a little bit came down, and a digital pad of flesh also supported some weight in the Mesohippus. I cite this in my paper, I forget exactly, I think it was Thomason, I think this was from the 80s that this was discovered. As well as that, Mesohippus was obviously herbivorous, like all equids, all perissodactyls. However, the Miocene and the Oligocene before that were a period of substantial ecological change as Earth moved from a sort of hothouse Eocene forested world to a more arid and cool grass-dominated environment, C3 plants to C4 plants. Mesohippus appears to have been a slow responder to that. It featured the teeth of a leaf forager, a foliage forager, and eating soft leaves and fruits, something in a forest. However, its isotopic analysis of its dentition actually suggests that it ate a fair amount of grasses, abrasive grasses, things that would have required quite a bit of chewing and put a lot of stress on its teeth. However, it was not a true hypsodont the way a modern horse is today. So that is interesting that it appears to have been a lag between the ecology it was in and the anatomy it was using to interact with that ecology. This maybe could have been the reason that Mesohippus went extinct when it did, and that later horses had more hypsodont teeth that were better adapted at eating the grasses that became their natural habitat. So Mesohippus is known to have existed from about 40 million to 32 million years ago. This is according to the New and Old World database. Now, keep in mind the Miocene did not begin until well after 32 million years ago. So with that in mind, for this to be a Miocene river environment, this animal cannot be a Mesohippus. So some of the other animals that we can look at in this environment include the Nimravis that's identified, which if we look at the date for the Nimravis, we have 32 million to 23 million years ago. This is also from the New and Old World database. Fortunately, the Nimravis has a close-up image on Carr's website, which is why I was able to find a higher resolution image of it, which I could not find for a Mesohippus. And then the third animal, which is in very low resolution, that we see that's identified in this picture is the Gomphothere, or I'm going to assume that this is a Gomphotherium because proboscideans are not my area of expertise, but I do believe that this is a Gomphotherium based on what I've been able to identify about it. But they're not the focus of this study. So Gomphotheres existed from 17 million to about 10,000 years ago. And since I don't know exactly what species or really what genus this is, I can't get very much more specific than that. But we have a clear discrepancy of overlapping dates between these 3 animals. So in order to determine what these actually are, we are going to have to discard some of the assumptions made in the label for this artwork, which I forgot to mention up until now. This artwork was commissioned by the Sam Noble Museum of Natural History in Oklahoma State University. So we can also assume this is likely a depiction of prehistoric, the Miocene of Oklahoma, or at least the Great Plains, some area similar to that. So we are going to be using the New and Old World database to try to identify animals similar to Mesohippus, Nimravis, and Gomphotherium that would have lived around the Miocene in the central Great Plains region that these animals could in fact represent based on their anatomy and ecology and the other animals in the environment at the time that these appear to be coexisting with. So if we look at the horse, we do have later horses from the Miocene, like I mentioned, Merychippus and Hypohippus, which I believe are the strongest contenders for what this species here is. Both of these animals were true unguligrades, which unfortunately we can't tell from this video what these animals are. But in the spirit of keeping as close to the artists and the commission's intended purpose, I'm going to not assume, but speculate that these may be Merychippus, in fact, more so than Mesohippus, although their anatomy is probably derived from skeletal depictions of Mesohippus. It makes a lot more ecological sense for these to be Merychippus without straining too far and making these something like Hypohippus or Pliohippus. So I believe these would be Merychippus realistically. Now, another aspect of the anatomy that we can discuss is the external morphology, so the coloration and some of the adaptations this animal is displaying. So clearly this animal has a cursorial lifestyle. It has long, thin legs for running like a modern horse, not so much like an early horse like Eohippus. So this is definitely an animal already adapted to an open or at least semi-open woodland grassland type environment, which makes more sense with a Merychippus occurring later in the Miocene, and not something like Mesohippus, which actually occurred in the Eocene as well as the early Oligocene, and they actually have gone extinct due to the spread of grasslands, whereas Merychippus would have been much more adapted to an open grassland environment. The coloration is sort of a blend of the modern wild horses in Asia, as well as zebras, and even takes some influence in the layout of the coloration from the extinct quagga, which was a relative of the zebra. So I think this is a fairly, if not accurate, then reasonable guess or speculation to make on the coloration of a prehistoric horse, especially the mixture of the stripes and the plain brown of the body, as well as the striped feet. Seems like a reasonable assumption to make about an animal that would have spent part of its time living in a forest, part of its time living in the open grasslands, probably for some camouflage, as well as to break up the outline the way modern tigers and zebras do today. And the mane and the tail are not long and flowing the way that we often depict modern horses today, but is short and cropped the way that wild horses, wild donkeys, and things like zebras would be, we would see them today. So that makes a lot more sense too, by the principle of phylogenetic bracketing, where our speculative reconstruction of our ancient horse would rely on the modern equivalents, modern relatives that we have available today, which would be zebras, horses, and donkeys. So I believe that externally, this is a reasonable speculation to make about the appearance of a fossil horse like a Mesohippus or a Merychippus or a Hypohippus. So we could get into the Nimravis as well, but the study is more focused on the Mesohippus. However, we will be discussing what this animal may be shortly. So like I said, we used the New and Old World database, selecting a species, looking through a list of species for a single genus, in this case Gomphotherium, and Productum is what I believe this animal to be. However, it could be a different kind of Gomphotherium, but Productum makes the most sense based on the dates and the regions that it existed in, as well as the other animals that coexisted in its environment. So here we can see the 4 different regions that the New and Old World database has Gomphotherium listed as showing up in these fossil beds, and then the maximum age and minimum age, which really constrains this this artwork. The reconstructed ecology of this artwork would have existed from about 15 million to 10 million years ago, in order to have this species of Gomphotherium, which is just about the only species it could be from what the New and Old World database has available. So with that being said, I believe that I have tentatively, speculatively identified new species and genus identifications, in some cases different family identifications, for these animals in this picture. So as I described, the Merychippus, which is what I believe this animal to be, existed from about 17 million to 10 million years ago, which corresponds very well with the Gomphotherium productum, 14 million to 10 million years ago. I put CF before Merychippus because, of course, we don't know what genus this truly is. The Gomphotherium, I put CF before the species because we don't truly know what species it is. But these are my best speculations based on the information that I have available. Now, the large cat was more difficult to determine. I spoke with Josh Samuels, and he suggested that a Barbarophilus would be a more reasonable animal to have in a Miocene setting with a Merychippus and a Gomphotherium than a Nimravis. Nimravis never would have coexisted with a Gomphotherium. It was much too early. It was actually too late to coexist with Mesohippus, but again, too early to coexist with Merychippus. So while Merychippus and Gomphotherium did coexist, Nimravis never would have coexisted with these animals. However, Barbarophilus, another kind of false saber-toothed cat, would have been possibly coexisting with these animals. I was not able to find a specific site where all three are mentioned in the same context the way I was with Merychippus and Gomphotherium, but Barbarophilus does fall into the right time period and does appear in the right environmental settings for this to be plausible, at least. No word on what species of Barbarophilus this could be. There are quite a few that it possibly could be, so I'm going to leave this as CF Barbarophilus sp. Barbarophilus is possibly a Nimravid, possibly a Barbarophelid, and it's possible that we don't know where Barbarophelid fell in the evolutionary tree. That was a whole other thing I got into researching while doing this, but I'm going to keep this this critique focused on the Merychippus and its ecological context. So I do believe that these are a family of Merychippus, sp, most likely, running across a Miocene river. We can see that this environment is partially forested and mostly open grassland, which would make sense for a Miocene setting, as well as these animals, which in the paper that had the Mesohippus dentition with the isotopic analysis, Merychippus was also mentioned. It had more advanced dentition than Mesohippus, but still retains some basal characteristics of early equids like Eohippus that were adapted for eating, browsing foliage from a forest. However, Merychippus would have been more adept than Mesohippus at eating abrasive grasses. So with that in mind, the context of the other animals in this environment, I believe this would have been a Gomphotherium, tentatively Productum, and Barbarophilus sp. And with that being said, I believe that that really sets this artwork in a different context, gives it a little bit more accuracy in the species that are depicted. So that being said, that was not an attack on Karen Carr's depiction of this environment. Actually, an interesting note to make about Nimravis is that up until 2004, which was after this artwork was created, Barbarophilus was identified as a Nimravid. That may have influenced her decision to call this animal a Nimravis and base her reconstruction on a Nimravis. I also don't know exactly what the Sam Noble commissioned, whether or not they asked specifically for all these animals to be placed in this specific setting together, and how much control she had over that. So I do like this art a lot. I think this is a very good piece of paleo art. It falls into the sort of traditional style of depicting a large number of animals, prehistoric animals, together in their environmental setting, which goes back to the days of Charles Knight or Rudolf Zallinger. Did that a lot, and paleo artists still do it today. So I do feel that this is a valid piece of art depicting an ancient environment. It certainly captures a moment which is dynamic and interesting. So for the purpose of paleo art to be something that captivates an audience and gets people interested in learning about these ancient animals, learning how they evolved, how they went extinct, I think that this is a very good piece of art and succeeds very well for its intended purpose. Thank you.